Go. Why you being aggressive? Why you being aggressive?
Prosecutors say former acting chief Carl Scott then shoved the man into an interview room, pushed him against a wall, and told him to sit down. Scott then appears to tell one of the officers wearing a body camera to turn it off. In an interview room, camera shows them grabbing the victim by his neck. He continues to beat and yell at him for several minutes. Scott resigned.
He told the two officers to cut the cameras off. And they just started beating. You know, I started thinking about all type of stuff like George Floyd. I just started thinking about it. You know, my mind was just racing.
His followers know him as Tyrant Terminator Audits on YouTube, and because of what happened to him, we're only going to use his first name, James, as he says he's still coping with trauma.
How you doing, officer?
Good, how you doing?
Pretty good.
It's an exchange James has had countless times.
You cannot videotape Cook County
where he films interactions with officers
You're not rushed, but you can't stay here all day.
and other public employees in government buildings. A form of activism is called an audit, all to test whether First Amendment rights are respected. On July 1st, a visit to Robbins Village Hall, he says, spiraled out of control when he came face to face with former acting police chief Carl Scott.
He pulled out his personal phone, he started recording me, and I told him that I was going to get a FOIA for that video that he was making, and I was there to, file a complaint.
A FOIA is a Freedom of Information Act request. Records from a public agency is for what James says was over his first visit to Village Hall back in March, when he first met Scott. That encounter captured on video.
Okay, right now you have to leave.
It ended in an arrest where James was charged with disorderly conduct and breach of peace. Both charges later dismissed.
This man walked into the police station to file a complaint against the police chief. Minutes later, that same chief drugged him behind closed doors, ordered everyone to turn their body cameras off, and beat him. And the punishment, 2 years probation. No jail time. I'm not here to pile on outrage or to try to defend anyone's actions. I'm here to figure out one thing. Was this police chief properly held accountable, or was he given a slap on the wrist because he was a police chief? And to figure out, was this sentencing just or just simply wrong? Man, what's up, family? I appreciate you tapping in for another edition of Just or Just Wrong. We're going to jump straight into this news clip to get the full context of the incident.
4:30, new police body cam video shows a former acting police chief in the south suburb of Robbins hitting a man in the back of his head. We first brought you this story a year and a half ago. Happened in July 2024 when a 43-year-old man came to the police department to file a complaint against the chief over a previous incident. We want to warn you, some of these images might be disturbing.
Go. Why you being aggressive?
Prosecutors say former acting chief Carl Scott then shoved the man into an interview room, pushed him against a wall, and told him to sit down. Scott then appears to tell one of the officers wearing a body camera to turn it off. In an interview room, camera shows them grabbing the victim by his neck. He continues to beat and yell at him for several minutes. Scott resigned, pleaded guilty to battery charges, and has been sentenced to 2 years probation. He also had his law enforcement certificate removed, meaning he can no longer work as a police officer.
Imagine being in that situation knowing there's no one to call for help. You don't have any outlet, no one to reach out to. The very people that you would call to protect you are literally slamming your head against a wall, choking you and dragging you into a back room, cutting the cameras off. That has to be a wild feeling, man. I just could not imagine me or one of my loved ones being in this exact situation. Now, I'm not an advocate for these audit people who goes and does these First Amendment audits. However, I'm not against it either. The Constitution is the Constitution. And maybe situations like this is the exact reason we need people like that to do things like that.
James came into the station filming and refused to stop recording. When Scott was called down to the lobby, he claims the man threatened his family.
When we humanize the badge, so when we humanize that, then we understand. You understand the frustration. You understand what it took. You understand what's at stake. Do you understand what you're protecting? So then the badge meant nothing at that point.
His actions cost him his badge.
I first initially came to Robbins as the deputy chief.
And his law enforcement career, which included 23 years as a federal agent before joining Robbins PD.
A defaming of my name has caused a strike against my integrity.
But the man on the end of those punches described a much scarier situation.
And it's like he's trying to make excuses as to why it happened, trying to say that he's human, people lose their temper, but you're held above board. You're held to a different level of standards with an expectation to have a different level of decorum to yourself. We're not expected, especially as the police chief, to act like this. This man came in to make a complaint, and instead of being able to file a complaint, you decide to just beat him. Like, how much better are your officers if you ask the police chief? This is not a regular officer. This is the chief of police for that department. This is insane. Now, we're going to get into exactly what the man, John, who was beaten up, had to say about it.
The two officers to cut the cameras off. And they just start beating me.
What did you mean when you said cut the cameras off?
My mind wanted to hold a conversation with him.
Scott resigned days before the Robbins mayor wanted to terminate him, and he hopes any cop or person can learn from what he calls a huge lapse in judgment.
One mistake doesn't define a person.
And after that 2-year probation period, Scott won't be watched anymore, but he will never be allowed to work in law enforcement again here in Illinois.
Now, directly following this incident, how I know that this man didn't take no accountability for his actions. He ended up getting a job with the school board. But as soon as that body cam was released, it all blew up in his face. Outrage came, and everybody was trying to vote him off of the board to get him out of there because no one trusted his character after they seen what he did to an innocent man trying to file a complaint.
Well, this school board vice president says the last year and a half of his life has been pure hell. Now some members of this community are calling for his resignation because of newly surfaced body camera video from when he served as a police chief.
You demonize yourself. You are not the victim here. God had nothing to do with what you did.
A fiery exchange as the vice president of the school board for Elementary School District 159 defended himself against calls for his resignation.
I've accepted my accountability, whether I felt that it was right or wrong. I've repented and I've given it on to the person who holds the ultimate judgment, which is God.
Carl Scott is the former Robbins police chief.
I don't care what you got. Sit down.
Shown beating a man in newly released body camera video from a 2024 incident at his police department. Scott was criminally charged. Prosecutors said at the time the victim was filing a complaint against him. Scott tells us the man is an internet agitator who threatened his family member. Scott resigned as chief. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office reports he pleaded guilty earlier this year to aggravated battery and was sentenced to 2 years probation. Scott insists the charge was reduced to a misdemeanor.
I still feel that I am a role model. I haven't done anything in my entire life at all. So one incident, one mistake does not define if you are a role model or not.
Some parents and community members are calling for accountability.
When we talk about being on the school board and you being responsible for the direction of hundreds of students in the district, it also gives credence to character, temperament, and being in a position of authority.
It's despicable, and I think to have someone of that type of power and leadership, it sends a very dangerous message to our children.
This isn't some rookie cop that didn't know the difference. He was the chief of police of the village, and he beat my client.
I don't believe that anybody from the city of Robbins will encounter something like this again because they see what's going on. You know, we're not going to tolerate that. You know, the justice system is obviously not tolerating that.
Now let's break down why this just isn't a simple case of battery. This man came in to file a complaint against the police chief himself, and what happened next wasn't just a simple assault. It was an abuse of power from the highest level in that department. He was taken into a back room, cameras are ordered off, and he was beaten by the very person who should have been there to ensure his safety. That's not battery, that's aggravated battery by the abuse of the authority he had. So when we talk about a sentence of 2 years probation, we have to ask ourselves, does this accurately reflect the gravity of the situation that happened that day? Now stick with me for this last part. There's two case laws I want to reference here. Of course, we gotta look at Graham versus Connor. Under settled case law, specifically Graham versus Connor, the Supreme Court has ruled that any use of force by a police officer must be objectively reasonable. So when someone comes in to file a complaint against said officer and he turns around and uses that moment to assault him, that's a violation of Graham versus Connor. So under Graham versus Connor, officers must act reasonably. But now what makes this case aggravated, which I feel the courts missed this somehow, what makes this an aggravated factor and 2 years probation I feel is not just. I reference 18 USC section 242. It is a crime for anyone under the color of law to willingly deprive someone of their constitutional right. When a police chief orders someone to turn their camera off, that's the exact type of behavior that this law references to. Now, you guys let me know if I'm being too harsh. We have to have this conversation down in the comments. Make sure you leave in the comments exactly what you think about this. You let me know if I'm getting out of character, if I'm tripping about this, but it just doesn't sit right with me. But hey, make sure you hit like for the algorithm and subscribe to the channel. Links are in the description if you need to reach me. I appreciate you for tapping in to another edition. I'm here till I'm not.